Meow! Huples Cat and Wolfie. The Armchair Prepper reads The Lucky Prepper. This I read years ago and quite enjoyed it and did recommend it. It's more for youth and there will be mega spoilers in this in-depth look at The Lucky Prepper by Emma Zeth, which she tells us is a pseudonym, which is kind of obvious with an author, and it is a gardener's story of surviving a pandemic. And joining us virtually is MacKenzie, because she, MacKenzie Drake, actually has also read this, and I did ask people for their comments. So Wolfie's having dinner. So MacKenzie Drake kindly reviewed the book for me, The Lucky Prepper, and I'm just going to read that now, and because I'm kind of boring to look at, I'll put up some pictures. I read this last night in 6 to 7 hours. It's a fast read, but an engaging read rather than rushed. I was surprised that it's literate and well proofread, neither of which is very common in contemporary prepper novels I've got at Amazon, and Zeth has a clean, clear writing style that doesn't get bogged down in sensory detail nor deep ruminations. The protagonist, Zoe, sounds like the science and maths educators I know, and the dialogue is realistic for the most part, if a little spare. Zoe's imperfect and human. She misses clues and makes mistakes here and there, but she's also lucky in mundane ways, and I think are plausible. Zeth handles the genre's tropes well for the most part, and she avoids several to the story's advantage. I was ready to cringe early on when she hit the mandatory supply and gear lists, but the descriptions were short and left a good deal to the reader's imagination. That was refreshing, though I sometimes caught myself wondering where she and her friend Frank were getting their proteins, not meat but legumes and such, early on. And I think that's fair, and as I say, I'm going to get into the book in detail with excerpts and discussion of the excerpts, but I think that's a fair appraisal of the book. It is fairly fast. There are in fact at least 2 typos in the book that I found, but then I haven't got an eagle eye. My biggest issue though was at the start of the pandemic, which sets the story in motion. COVID-19 gave those of us who tried to be even semi-prepared time to get ourselves and our loved ones ready for the longer haul, and we still have a window of opportunity between spikes or waves. Zeth's unnamed virus explodes with almost no warning and a huge death and disability rate right from the onset. Her descriptions of the panic buying during and after the first week in work, I thought pretty spot on, though I guess toilet roll isn't such an issue in British suburbs as it was here in the United States. Who knew? Indeed, that is one of the misses, but remember, writing a book about a pandemic a couple of years before a pandemic, you're going to make errors. All in all, it's a good story, and I'll probably read it again fairly soon. I'll make a point of leaving a review at Amazon too, because there is no sequel. She doesn't get feedback. I'd like to see where this goes. I'm not sure I do want to see where it goes, but we'll get into that. So the book is a fair read. It's about 300 pages, pretty decent, and it starts like most of these do with a chapter that is basically setting up the scenario and introducing the lead character. One of the strengths of this book is she obviously is a gardener. She obviously is a prepper. So the book is actually early on, the first third to 2/3 of the book are actually full of lists and ideas and helpful advice. For example, page 1, home, she's not feeling very well, so she doesn't go to work. I grated some ginger into a mug and added a spoonful of honey and then poured in the boiling water. Absolutely decent treatment for the onset of a cold or flu. I felt I could have gone to work for a single day, but if I didn't take the rest day, I could have ended up being sick for a week. And that's really true. So you have to be wary of that. A lot of us have to work anyway, even if you don't feel well. But taking the odd day off because you feel under the weather and resting in bed is a good idea. One of the arguable parts of the book is where she says that she doesn't take paracetamol, which is acetaminophen in North America, or ibuprofen. And she does not believe in driving a fever down if you have a cold or a flu. That is partially true, and I would refer you to my video on colds and on flus. There is actually a role for antipyretics, medications that reduce temperature, reduce fever in certain types of illness. That actually is a good idea. However, I would not recommend Advil ibuprofen for anybody over the age of 40, just because there has been some side effects and I'm not really that keen, plus Tylenol works just well. I think we're all fed up of super spreaders, but this implies here that on the Tuesday, one of the teachers called Gabby actually went to school with a cold and was coughing and sneezing in the assembly hall, which was warm right by a fan that blew the air over everybody. So it doesn't state that she did infect everybody, including the author, the protagonist, Zoe, but it does actually imply that. And I think we all kind of get that now. You have to be living under a rock for the last 12 months not to understand how airborne and droplet influenza and colds and viruses spread. So Zoe is a prepper, and she goes on prepper forum sites and studies it and does some minor prepping. What killed me right from the get-go is this part, and this is on literally page 2. I taught science. I knew that a single sneeze could contain over 100,000 germs. Even so, infection rates for the flu were about 5%. For 300 kids to be ill, the bug had to be incredibly contagious. Indeed, and anybody with a science background, she's a science teacher who's into prepping, would look at 300 children in a class of a school of 1,000 going off sick in like 24 hours as a clear and absolute sign something major is going on, and they would immediately go and prep up by buying a ton of stuff at the stores before everybody else twigs in that this might be a pandemic. So she says the first rule of prepping is you don't talk about prepping, and I actually agree with that. I don't think your family, unless they're very close to you, or your neighbours, unless you're very close to them, should really be told explicitly that you're a prepper and that you have hoarded up stuff. They should probably be aware of the fact that you're keen on camping, because camping's a good prep, a good way of getting ready for any sort of grid down. But they shouldn't know you're a prepper. You shouldn't go up to people at barbecues on the street and talk to them about the end of the world and do you have enough rice stored up. It's a clear indication people will remember those conversations if they are going hungry. So unlike most of the prepper genre, Zoe's clear idea right at the start of this SHTF is to stock up and hide. Her plan isn't to secure the perimeter, get extra ammo, drive across America to pick up a child. No. Now, one of the things with this is that her stocks, her general pantry stocks, have run low because she's been very busy at school with exams, and she says that. So real life has got in the way of her prepping, so she's in less than an ideal position. She does state that water would have been a problem, but she has one water filter bottle. And frankly, that's inadequate. Water is so key that you must have tablets and you must have at least 2 filtration units. I do recommend the Berkey filter as the main filter to have. I also use it in my house to filter out the chlorine and fluoride, and I think it's a good idea to have one. So literally the early part of the book especially is full of stuff like this, which is really important to read and think about. I'd obviously used everything up. Off to Tesco to stock up before the crazies start panic buying. It's funny how you think you're being clever until you realise that almost everyone else is doing the same thing. It wasn't panic buying, not yet, but I could see other people had the same idea as me. Tesco's car park was almost full. On a Friday afternoon, I kind of expected it to be busy, but this was different. Lots of crying kids, parents looking stressed. I grabbed a trolley and headed for the tinned food. This aisle was almost empty. People are going to grab what they think is obvious to grab. As a prepper in that sort of situation, given the fact it is a pandemic, I probably would not be in Tesco's, which is kind of like a superstore. I probably would be at home. If I did go stocking, I'd probably go to the vets to get food for the dog and cats, and I'd probably go to local small mum and pop stores, grocery stores in the area that are tiny, and I'd probably buy up there, buy tin food, not much, buy some oil, not much, buy some medications, not much. I don't want to splash out and make a big deal of this, but I really want to keep distance and I want to be wearing a mask. There is no particular mask wearing in this book. So the first chapter ends with her watching TV and everything looks really bad. The NHS is having problems, people are panic buying a little bit, and it looks terrible. It all looked very bad and I didn't know what to do, so I decided to go to the garden centre, as gardeners might. Again, think outside the box. Rather than go to Tesco to restock up on her tinned food, she probably would have been better off going to the garden centre and small little stores around the area by her, because she has a car, rather than going to a major grocery outlet. People are going to think superstore. People are going to think Walmart, Costco. Really, once the message is out there online that there's something going on, don't go to those places, especially in a pandemic, because you could get infected and you could easily get hurt. And you are going to waste a ton of time when you could be doing other preps to get ready for an impending grid down. Hindsight's 2020, isn't it, Wolf? Excellentness. Page 14. Scientists had been warning about a pandemic for years. They kept talking about Spanish flu and bird flu and the inevitability of an outbreak. Indeed. And MacKenzie, there's an example of a typo, one of like 2 or 3 that I did find in the book. I think this has a lot of resonance for us today. Maybe now I would check the news again. There was an abundance of stories highlighting the chaos in the hospitals, and everywhere I clicked there were alarmist reports of food shortages with pictures of supermarkets with empty shelves. It wasn't helpful news, it was clickbait. And that's great news. Whenever there's going to be an SHTF, except for a sudden unexplained EMP, even then we'd probably have news coverage before it hit, most people are going to spend too much time on the radio, on the telephone, on the internet and watching news reports. It's the time to act. It's the time to fill up the bathtubs, fill up all water containers, secure the house, remove your little rocks from around your garden. Think about seriously removing ladders so people can't break in, arming up, getting ready, moving if that's your plan, rather than wait to be moved. So she has an elderly mother and a somewhat intellectual but kind of autistic brother who don't live near her but quite near. And they're a major thing in this, the dependency that she has for them in terms of their social contact and the dependency they have for her and the fact that what she wants to do they don't want to do. I picked up my bag and grabbed the keys. Yet again I had volunteered to do something I didn't really want to do. But the family was important, and if they weren't going to properly take care of themselves then it was up to me to do so. Yes and no. Again, pre-planning. Most people, her mother's got a really expensive house in a nice part of London, out of London. So it wouldn't have been too difficult for Zoe over a period of years to put suitcases covered with clothes inside, but inside that lots of tins and hard goods. She could have actually resupplied her parent and her brother without them knowing. And then she could have told them, by the way, if there's a problem I'll call you, or left them an envelope saying if anything ever bad happens open the envelope, and it could say, hey, there's a ton of stuff in the suitcases in the spare room, you might want to look at it. What she's doing here is what we all did in the pandemic of 2020 and ongoing, is we put family first before health and are prepping. Almost nobody bugged out, almost nobody holed up, almost nobody stopped going to work. This is a lovely, lovely bit. One of the major things people always talk about is bugging out. And she talks about where to bug out to and how she would do it. And it's a non-traditionalist bug out that she's thinking of, which she does not do. The UK map of the outbreak was covered in red circles. London had the largest circles, indicating many cases, but Manchester and Birmingham were similarly covered. Some rural areas seem to have almost none. I looked around my kitchen. Would it be safer further away from London? I would have stayed in a B&B or a hotel if I left, and persuade Mom and Vic to come with me. Was it really worth it? So she actually investigates this and she finds that all of the rural B&Bs are actually solidly booked. A lot of other people wanting to get out of London and the major cities and don't have family or friends to go to and have actually booked into bed and breakfasts in rural areas, which is great until the food runs out. The locals will not feed tourists and there won't be that much food in the rural areas despite what people claim. The best strategy would be to stay in, hide and wait until things were back to normal. Yeah, I guess. That's one of the big things. A lot of preppers are prepping for a temporary SHTF, claiming they're prepping for nuclear war. The preps that most people are doing online and recommending you do are totally inadequate for a long haul prep. Sure, storing up 100 gallons of water is a great idea and a good prep and I recommend it. But what do you do when that runs out? Do you have taps? Do you have barrels? Do you have the knowledge to make a drainage collection system for water sufficient to provide enough water for you day to day for years? Do you have filtration systems that will work for years? Do you have heat and cooling backups that will last years, not a few months? Don't get me wrong here, any prep's better than no prep. But if you were taking it seriously as a hobby, like I do, I think long term. I try not to prep for the immediate comfort things that a short term or even a long term SHTF would have me facing in the first week or two. I expect it to be unpleasant and I expect it to be rough, and I don't want to have normal comforts during that opening phase of the SHTF. Later on, yeah, but in the opening phase, no. So she finally gets around after shopping to actually doing something about the security of her own house. So what she does is she makes the door secure, she makes the living room and all the rooms from the road look empty. She hangs up net lace curtains so people can't look in. So she does all the right things and she keeps the lights off. I'm not home, no need to come in here. Now later on in SSGF that procedure won't work, but in the first opening phase people will go for opportunity. So this catches a surprise later on, but she actually sees reports on a prepper forum that she goes to. There were also stories of people knocking on doors, demanding food. People weren't used to doing without, and there was a lot of unrest building. It made me uneasy. And I actually think this is true. I do think people might be going door to door, knocking on doors once they run out of food, asking for food. I think this is way too soon for this in the book. And I also think in a pandemic, there's no suggestion here that people are frightened of other people contaminating them and killing them. Remember, we've had a sudden flu or viral epidemic that's airborne that's killed tons of people over about a 48 to 76 hour period. And people know that. And people are still going to the stores, people are still knocking on doors, people are acting kind of normal in this pandemic. And I think that part wasn't really thought out. There's no real effort made to actually avoid catching a pandemic anywhere in this book. And that's a major negative. It would be front and centre. For example, if there was a nuclear war, front and centre in everybody's actions from that point on would be to avoid getting radiation sickness. They wouldn't just act like normal, having a world that's destroyed and having problems because of the nuclear war, but not actually be doing anything to avoid getting radiation sickness. So I do recommend this, and I do think it's a fun book. And that's all from me, the Armchair Prepper, and my faithful assistant, Wolfie the dog. Toodles. This has been a 2021 Arctic Terrier production.